What first sparked your interest in nonverbal communications, especially smiles?
Long-standing interest. When we were growing up, I had two sibs in which my mother repeatedly would say things like, yes, you need to pay attention, listen well when people talk, but you need to also pay close attention to how they're talking and how they're saying what they're saying. Because it's the facial expressions, it's the tone of voice, it's a whole raft of these other things that really tell the tale.
Yeah. Why do you think smiles in particular are so revealing?
They're both revealing and influential. So on the one hand, my smile and how I smile, and even if I don't, which is also revealing, might say to you something about how I'm currently thinking and feeling and where I'm going. But my smiles also affect you. So if, say when you first came into the office, if you said, hi Professor LeFrance, and I went, hello, the absence of a smile would say as much as the presence of a smile. It opens things up, it functions as a kind of glue that gets things, the connections kind of on track. So it serves a lot of functions.
Okay. Do you think there's a main purpose of smiles that people use in everyday actions, or what would be the main purposes that you...
I would say that the main purpose is to create, maintain, and rectify interpersonal relationships that may have gone astray. So first impressions are helped a lot by smiling. The absence suggests maybe someone is not willing to have a connection or relationship. In everyday interactions, even if you meet someone on a stairway or by an elevator, the quick smiles that pass are not meant to be, I love you, I'm your friend to the end of time. It's a way of establishing a kind of respect, a basic, I recognize you as a fellow human being and I want you to recognize me as such. Sometimes it's all that's needed to take down the tenor of a situation that's gotten a little hostile, a little potential for conflict. So sometimes all someone has to do is smile, in which we say, okay, let's just lower the temperature here, it's going to be okay.
Could you tell us a little bit about your book, Lip Service, and if you were to explain like your main argument to a person who had no experience in social psychology, how would you do that?
The main argument is that smiles have consequences. That is to say, many people think of a smile as this small, relatively incidental, relatively insignificant facial expression. But in fact, when there are circumstances in which people cannot smile because of, say, facial paralysis or a brain lesion or a psychological anomaly like depression or schizophrenia, or autistic kids, for example, who cannot and will not smile, relationships can't happen. It's part of what goes into saying, I'm a human being and let's have some contact. So where people tend to think of smile as something nice and pleasant and everybody should do it if the picture's being taken, and you should do it when you're meeting your fiance's parents and what. It's much more important in negotiation, in establishing connections across cultural or racial or class lines, where people might initially be on the wrong edge, might be initially a little wary, and a smile says, okay, we can make this work. We know, for example, that babies in the womb are smiling even before birth, and that suggests to researchers that basically they're practicing, obviously not in any intentional sense, but it's a way to secure attachment to a caregiver, because when human babies are born, they are incredibly vulnerable to all manner of bad things happening to them. So they need a secure attachment with a caregiver who pledges lifelong allegiance, and there's nothing more seductive than a happy baby in which adults see and feel, okay, you're mine, I'll take care of you, you don't have to worry, everything's taken care of.
How did you conduct your research?
We do all manner of things. In the lab, we might do something like, you come into the lab, you think you are going to take part in an experiment, but in fact when you're in the waiting room, you're actually in the experiment, because we have a tiny little camera that's filming you even as you sit there, and we may be interested in how you respond to a stranger who in fact we've planted there. to respond to you or to say certain things to you. So how likely is it that you will respond positively by one sign of which is a facial expression? We insult people, we harass people, we put people in a circumstance in which they're challenged, that is, their belief systems are challenged. And part of what we're looking for is, when does the smile occur? Does it occur? How big, genuine, or false is it? And whether it predicts the outcome of it.
Do you think smiles are used to present like a false sense?
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
I would say most of the smiles you would see on any given day are false. But having said that, the question is, what else do they do besides being false? Now, false is a funny word here. The usual distinction that psychologists make is between the so-called genuine, spontaneous, or so-called Duchenne smile, after a 19th century physiologist who named it, which involves both this muscle, which brings the corners of the mouth upward, but also a muscle called the ocularis oculi, which circumferences the eyeball. When you genuinely smile, that muscle raises the cheeks as well as the other corners of the eyes. This one you can fake. This one is much harder to deliberately do it. People are presented with credentials of someone, say, who may have been involved in some academic misconduct, perhaps cheated on an exam or plagiarized. Groups get all the same information about someone, save for the fact that in the upper right-hand corner of this dossier of information, there's a photograph of the person who is either smiling or not smiling or smiling genuinely. So there's a false smile, a genuine smile, and a no smile. And what we find is that people are more likely to give benefit of the doubt to the false smiler than to the person who doesn't smile, and there's no effect for the genuine smile. And the data seem to indicate it's because people see in the false smile, they don't label it that, that's not the way it's designated, is a person who's trying to be good, basically. It's a way of saying, yeah, maybe screwed up a little here, but you know, deep down, I'm a decent person, you can trust me in the future, I'm not going to do that kind of thing again. So smiles, even false ones, that is to say, they're deliberate rather than genuinely felt, have a lot of social impact that's over and above just being reflecting what I'm feeling inside.
How do you think the role of smiles changes across different cultures?
It's absolutely fascinating field. So you've got two things going on here. One is there has been no culture that has not found to smile. There's been no historical period, as far as we know, in terms of existing records, where people haven't smiled, at least some of the time. However, there are subtle, though detectable, variations in how each culture actually does smile, as well as all the attendant rules and ideas for when it's appropriate to smile. So, you take your garden variety American, you put them in Sweden, and Swedes think that Americans are dopey because they're smiling all the time. They smile on the street, they smile at store people, they smile in parks and the like. Whereas in parts of the world like Northern Europe, you don't smile at people you don't know. That is seen as intrusive and inappropriate. We know, for example, that people in the Far East, most notably Japan, kids are taught from very early on to smile if they're feeling bad, because it is not to impose their bad feelings on other people. So the assumption is, if you feel bad and look bad, then somebody is obligated in some sense to take care of you. And that's an obligation that many times is inappropriate to impose on someone else. So widows smile. People who are in extraordinarily physical pain will smile. And Americans look at that kind of smiling and think, inauthentic, inscrutable, completely false. It's because the goal is what Japanese are attempting to do is not in the Americans' repertoire. Last but not least, this is the stuff that makes research so fun. You show a group of faces to Americans and Australians, and you say, pick out who's Australian and who's American. They're not wearing, flag T-shirts. They're not discernible. If the faces have neutral facial expressions, people can't do it beyond chance. But if they're smiling, they can do it. So Americans looking at a smiling set of Australian faces and American faces can tell who's American and who's Australian. They can't tell you how. They say, you just know it. You just look at that face and you just see it and you just know it. You recognize it for what it is. So it means that there are some small things going on in the face that can be seen and understood to be recognizable.
So how do gender roles play into the whole nonverbal interactions?
Nearly everything. For example, we know that women smile significantly more than men, on average. We're talking averages. So the question then comes up is, why is that the case? So one core argument is genetically and or postnatally, in terms of hormones, women are in the position more often than men of providing relationship support, whether it's to babies or spouses or kids or whatever. And smiling and other related nonverbal behaviors are ways to establish contact, so that's what the female sex does. Some others argue it has nothing to do with genetics or hormones, it has everything to do with social roles. Women are the caregivers in society. Women are supposed to be the soothers of hurt feelings, are the calmer of the troubled waters, of the smoother of social relationships. And that all of those activities are best done in the nonverbal area. Finally, there are some who argue, myself included, who would say that women are more encouraged to look non-threatening, that men can be powerful and dominant and assertive and independent and aggressive, and that's a nice combination of features, masculinity and dominant behavior. And that women, conversely, should be non-threatening, they should be comforting, nurturing, compassionate, empathic. And again, what goes with that are behaviors that say, you don't have to take me quite as seriously. I'm a nice person, I'm an agreeable person, and I'm not going to make life worse for you, I'm going to make life better for you. So we're trying to sort out when and why women tend to engage in more sociable, agreeable, communicative kinds of behaviors than men do.
Do you think that those roles of smiles and gender roles are changing in society?
It's a great question.
There's a huge feminist push right now, make everything equal and stuff.
Well, I think that's one of those times when it's especially interesting to study these kinds of things, because on the surface, people will say things have changed enormously, that opportunities for women have never been better, that equality between the sexes is more reality than it has ever been. But when we look at other indicators of equality, not so much. And the ones we look at are the nonverbal ones. So who gets listened to in a mixed gender discussion? Whose points of view are regarded as the ones that people think are sharp and smart and on top of things, and when are others simply dismissed or made invisible? And in a lot of ways, women's contributions are still regarded as lesser than that of men, even in college campuses where equality rules.